All I wanted to do was shower and collapse into bed. As I stepped inside, I noticed something strange. My laundry room light was on. I was sure I had turned it off that morning, but I chalked it up to being absent-minded in my rush and turned it off again. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to a faint noise. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but as I lay there, I realised it was coming from the laundry room. A soft, rhythmic, thumping sound. My heart started to race. I debated whether to get up and check or just stay in bed and hope it stopped. Curiosity got the better of me, so I grabbed my phone for light and tiptoed to the laundry room. When I opened the door, everything was quiet, but then I saw it. The hatch to the crawl space was slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. I distinctly remembered it being locked, and there was no way I could have accidentally opened it. Trying to stay calm, I convinced myself it might be an animal that had somehow gotten in. I shut the hatch tightly and placed a heavy box of detergent on top of it before going back to bed. The next day, I called the landlord to ask if there was any pest issues I should know about. He seemed surprised and said no one had reported anything like that before. Still, he promised to send someone over to check it out. That night, I double-checked the hatch and even put a chair on top of it for good measure. I didn't hear any noises, and I started to feel a little silly for being so freaked out. But around 3 a.m. I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I froze. My bedroom door doesn't creak unless you push it slowly, and I knew I had closed it before bed. I stayed as still as I could, barely breathing, as I heard soft footsteps shuffle into the room. My phone was on the nightstand, just out of reach. The footsteps stopped right next to my bed. I could feel someone's presence, their quiet breathing in the dark. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and swung it toward the intruder. There was a man crouched on the floor, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes wide and unblinking. He looked just as startled as I was. I screamed and bolted out of the room, running outside to the neighbour's house. I banged on the door until they let me in, and they called the police. When the officers arrived, they found a man still in my house, hiding in the crawl space. He had a small mattress, some food wrappers, and a collection of random items he must have taken from my house. The lock on the hatch had been tampered with, and from the looks of it, he had been living under my house for at least a few days, maybe longer. The scariest part, the police said they found a notebook with detailed notes about me. He had written down my daily routine, when I left for work, when I came home, even what I wore. There was also a list of plans, though they wouldn't tell me what was on it. I moved out the next week and stayed with friends until I got a new place. To this day, I have no idea how he got in, or how long he had been watching me before I noticed something was wrong. To the man in the crawl space, let's not meet, ever. The next creepy little story is called The Time a Stranger Followed Me for Hours and Wouldn't Let Me Escape. A few years ago, I had a terrifying experience that still haunts me to this day. I was living in a busy city at the time, and I had just finished a late shift at work. It was around 10 p.m, and I was walking home through the quieter side streets of my neighbourhood. I'm someone who's always been somewhat cautious, so I was alert any unusual activity. As I walked down the street, I noticed a guy about 20 feet behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. He seemed like just another person walking the same route, but something about his movements caught my attention. He wasn't walking in a normal manner. He was clearly trying to keep his distance, but his pace matched mine, no matter how fast or slow I went. After a few blocks, I decided to take a detour. I turned onto a side street that was a little less populated, hoping he wouldn't follow. I checked over my shoulder, and sure enough, he was still there. It's hard to describe, but I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My instincts told me something wasn't right. I crossed the street, hoping that would throw him off, but he crossed too, without hesitation. I thought, okay, this is weird now. I had to make a decision. I wasn't that far from home, but something about this guy's persistence made me uncomfortable. I decided to stop at a nearby 24/7 convenience store to try to lose him. The store was empty, save for the cashier, who barely looked up from his phone. I quickly grabbed a drink and stood by the door, hoping to see if the guy would pass by. He didn't. He stopped right outside the store. At this point, I could see his face clearly through the glass. He was staring directly at me. I panicked and ran back into the aisles, trying to calm down. I could hear his footsteps growing louder as he approached the door. I couldn't stay here any longer. I tried to pay, but I was also so rattled I couldn't focus on anything. The cashier just stared at me, probably wondering why I looked so frantic. I threw the drink on the counter, paid quickly, and bolted out of the door. I ran down another street, not wanting to look back, but knowing what I had to do. I didn't see him for a while, and my heart slowly started to calm down. But as I turned the corner to my street, I saw him again, standing at the far end of the block. It was like he had been waiting there the whole time. I wasn't sure what to do next. I considered calling the police, but he hadn't really done anything illegal, just followed me for a while. I didn't want to overreact, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a coincidence. He was still standing there, watching me, and now he was closer. I took a deep breath, checked both ways, and made a beeline for my apartment building, not daring to look back until I was inside. When I got to my apartment, I locked the door and stayed there, staring out the window for what felt like hours. I didn't see him again after that night, but the whole experience left me unsettled for weeks. I never felt comfortable walking home alone late at night after that, even though I've lived in the city my entire life. I still wonder if I was just being paranoid, but there was something off about the way he followed me. It felt intentional, and it left me with a gut feeling I couldn't shake. If you're reading this, the guy who followed me for hours that night, let's not meet again. Ugh, that would give me the shivers. The next little story is called Banana Peel and Clock. I posted this in a different sub, but I can't get it out of my mind. The more I consider it, the more certain I am that someone, most likely my creepy maintenance guy, entered my apartment in a very unconventional way. This happened close to 10 years ago. Daylight saving time reminds me of a very strange incident. My husband, baby daughter, and I lived together in a small apartment. We had a clock on the wall in our living room that we never adjusted for daylight savings time. It had been an hour off for months. It was out of reach and we were really busy. Plus, eventually, it would be correct again. One day I got home from a morning outing with my daughter and noticed a banana peel was in the hall on the floor. It had been stepped on. This is very strange because we do not have any bananas in our house. In fact, we never did. None of us ever ate them. I was quite startled. I sent a text to my husband and asked him if he stopped by home during his shift and possibly dropped a banana peel on the floor. He said he most certainly had not. We checked our camera footage and no one had come up into our apartment. I cleaned the banana up off the carpet. I packed a diaper bag for my daughter so we could leave for the afternoon. Before we walked out the door, I glanced at our clock. The time was correct. It had been adjusted for the time change. I was startled. I checked my phone just to be certain. Sure enough, the clock had been adjusted. I grabbed my daughter and her bag and we left. Once we got safely to the car, I messaged my husband to ask if he had adjusted the clock. He had not. When we got home that evening, my husband thought I had been joking with him. I still can't explain what happened. My husband is not a practical joker, and this would be a very weird practical joke to play. We felt pretty certain that no one had entered our front door. We had a camera. They weren't as good as the ones that they make these days, but it worked. The only other way someone could have come into our apartment is through the attic, which was connected to the apartment next door. There were little attic doors in the largest bedroom ceilings. I used to tell myself that this was some sort of otherworldly or paranormal activity, but the less naive I get, the more I believe our maintenance guy must have entered our apartment through the attic. I assume it must have been the maintenance guy because he had access to keys, ladders, and such things. He also gave me very bad vibes. He always made me feel uneasy. His stares lingered, and he was always hanging around, making uncomfortable conversation. The thing that makes me most uncomfortable is that whoever it was left obvious clues that he had been there. If he had been trying to be stealthy, he surely wouldn't have smashed a banana into the carpet and changed the clock. I wonder what he was doing in our apartment, just hanging around. How often did he do this? Why was he comfortable enough to leave obvious clues that he had been there? He was fired after just a few months on the job. I was relieved at that time. Looking back, thinking about things now, I'm more than relieved. I'll be very happy if that maintenance guy and I never meet again. All these stories are about people creeping into people's houses. It's quite unsettling. The next story is called My Brother's Encounter with the Man in the Black Jacket in late 80s Moscow. I was born in Moscow, Russia in the early 90s, but my brother was born in 1980, and this is his story. I was about 7 or 8 years old, and me, along with my friends, were the absolute biggest idiots in terms of doing dangerous stuff. We would make smoke bombs and fireworks out of whatever we found, and did tons of other stupid stuff. Russia in the late 80s resembled the post-apocalyptic wasteland you see in the movies in a lot of places, mainly because there was really no law and order, so no one cared. You were able to buy crazy things off the streets. My father was once offered an old rocket launcher. With this, parents often just let their kids mess around in these places, so we were doing stupid stuff in these abandoned buildings. Well, one day, when we were messing around, when one of my friends noticed someone lurking nearby, we didn't really care. We were used to seeing weird stuff, but after a bit we noticed the person was not really moving. expensive at the time, and American sneakers, also very expensive. He didn't really greet us or anything, but must have seen me looking at his shoes because he said, "Like my shoes, I have more if you want them, come on." Now few things really unnerved any of us, but this dude definitely did. If you know anything about Russia in that era, this dude looked like someone you did not want to mess with. The kicker though, once he turned around, my friend noticed that he had a gun in his pants. The second he saw that, he just yelled, "Gun!" and booked it, and we all just scattered. I just heard the guy curse loudly, but did not see him again. Now if the story ended here, it would have been just a creepy encounter, but sometime later we were no longer allowed to play in that area. I found out much later that they had found another child beaten to death with a rock in that building shortly after our experience. To be honest, as a kid, I never really thought much about this until my parents told me about the death, at which point the dots connected and I realised what we potentially ran away from. Oh my god. Another little creepy story is called "A Man Was Living in My Basement for Months." There's definitely a theme developing here. You hear stories about people unknowingly squatting in other people's homes, but you never think it would actually happen to you. It happened to me. About 10 years ago, I was living alone in a two-family house on the second floor with my then toddler. For the story to make sense, I need to try and explain the layout and the backstory. My brother's close friend at the time lived on the first floor and is the one who referred me to the landlord. We had private front entrances, but a shared back entrance with a staircase that ran from the basement all the way to the second floor. I would frequently leave my back door unlocked because I had a habit of locking my keys in the house, and my downstairs neighbour could let me in the back door. The downstairs neighbour had a friend who was kind of down and out. He had a history of substance abuse, but was supposedly clean at the time. He was a relatively nice guy, and my neighbour had been letting him stay on his couch for a while. The neighbour had a 4-year-old daughter, and having someone constantly sleeping on the couch without any plans of finding a permanent living situation was becoming disruptive to their everyday lives. The neighbour tells him he needs to go. It was summertime, so the friend decides he's going to sleep on the couch on our covered porch. We tell him that's not acceptable, and when we asked him to leave, we meant the property in general. It had also become abundantly clear that he was using again, and his behaviour had become somewhat erratic. He was also making a lot of unsolicited advances on me, which had become increasingly uncomfortable. He wasn't happy, but it wasn't our problem. He stopped coming around, and we no longer saw him around town. Fast forward a month or so, and I noticed things going missing. Jewellery, small amounts of money left around the house, lighters, inconsequential items I had written off as lost. This house was old with paper-thin walls. The back door in question was right next to the bathroom along one side of the shower. It also made a very distinct noise when opened. One day, my car was at the mechanic, so it probably appeared that I wasn't home. I'm showering, and I swear I hear the back door open. I freeze, practically stop breathing, but after a few minutes when nobody murdered me American Psycho style, I wrote it off again. I'm a notorious wimp and had a history since childhood of thinking every strange noise was a potential murderer. This was a long time ago, so I don't remember the exact length of time, possibly a few weeks. The basement was really big and shared, and the landlord also stored stuff down there. It was very packed with some basement. The man pushed the landlord down, runs out of the house and down the street. We call the police, who finds him hiding in a trash can around the corner. Upon further investigation, we find the basement window had been ever so slightly propped open. In a back corner behind some boxes was a nest of blankets filled with our missing items, plus some drug paraphernalia. It reminded me of Creature's Nest under the stairs at Grimmauld Place. If you know, you know. He had also left his flip phone behind in the chaos, where we found a lot of pictures of me sleeping. This man had been high on crack, living in our basement and regularly entering my apartment, both when I wasn't home and when I was sleeping, for months. While he seemed like a nice guy, he was regularly high on hard drugs, and that changes people. I still get chills, knowing he could have done anything to me and my child, and I would have never seen it coming. The worst part is that the charges somehow got dropped, and they never even consulted us, and they never gave us an option as the victims. This was not even close to his first criminal offence. My state is notoriously soft on non-violent criminals, regardless of whether it was a victimless crime or not. My local police department is also notorious for making deals in exchange for information on even the smallest time drug dealers. We didn't get any justice. Luckily, this didn't have much of a lasting effect on my mental health, just more of a WTF moment. Can't believe that really happened. It feels like a fever dream. Jason, let's not meet. The next one is called I Might Be One Let's Not Meet Person. I'll keep this short. I'm not sure if this post really belongs here. If not, feel free to take it down. So I'm currently focusing on taking care of myself. Over the past few years, especially since I had been in a very toxic relationship, I began noticing certain behavioural patterns I've always had. These didn't really bother me before, but they've started to affect my daily life. Since I was young, I felt a bit invisible at school. I remember that even though I did well academically and had high grades, most teachers and students wouldn't remember my name and would act surprised when the rankings came out. Many teachers would read my name among the top 3 and ask, "Who is this?" One of the first things I remember doing, which seems strange looking back now, was becoming obsessed with this girl. She was a year ahead of me, Japanese, and seemed really shy. During lunch breaks, I would spend most of my time watching her, noticing who she hung out with, etc. Over time, my interest kept growing until one day I used the lunch break to go into her classroom and look through her things, just to find her name. I managed to do it without anyone noticing. I started following her on social media out of nowhere, and she didn't even know we went to the same school. We talked for a while. I even told her I was in another class and that I was interested in her, but I never explained how I found her profile. I just said something like, "Oh, we have mutual friends." I made sure to actually have mutual friends before sending her a friend request. I remember one day I decided, out of the blue, to tell her things about herself that I shouldn't have known because we've never talked about them. Her address, old blogs she had, the church she attended. I started this as a way to mess with her a little, but I loved how she reacted, slightly frightened, so I kept going until she was actually a bit terrified. After that, it felt too strange to maintain any kind of friendship. I had even followed her home once few relationships, most of which didn't end well. Some because of things that I did, others because of things people did to me. I remember feeling a strong impulse for revenge against those who broke my heart, fantasizing about stalking them, making them feel afraid. I won't go into detail about every relationship, but the person I ended up dating had a serious mental health issue as well. She was very wealthy, so our lives were very different. She was also younger. Every now and then she would bring up the idea of opening our relationship or mention how she and her friends thought she should enjoy life more before settling down. We began a cycle of dating and breaking up. Everything started spiraling, and each time we got back together, the relationship felt more and more distorted. Eventually, we both cheated on one another, and the relationship ended for good. But for some reason, my broken mind couldn't let it go. I was so hurt by everything that had happened, and this time it was much harder to resist those impulses towards violence, stalking, and instilling fear. I seemed like a normal person at work, in the office, but in my mind there was this voice that really wanted vengeance. At some point, it became unbearable. After work, I started hanging around places near the house, supermarkets, parks, any spots we'd gone together. I made sure she knew I was there or had been there. Doing this made me feel better, less anxious. My mind would feel at peace for a while. We never talked directly about it, nor did she confront me. Eventually I managed to get over it and started controlling these impulses again until they disappeared. When I began treatment and started talking about all of this and other issues, like my lack of empathy, struggles with socialization, and mimicking emotions I didn't really feel, I began to see just how messed up these behaviours were. Now, I'm in treatment, and I'm close to a diagnosis, though since it's not 100% confirmed, I don't think it's helpful to share it here. If you're feeling things like this, seek help. I'm not the type of person who wants to give in to bad thoughts or impulses. I want to be a good person, despite everything. Apologies to anyone I may have hurt with my actions. The next one is called Someone Impersonated My Sister and Invited Me to the Shadiest Part of Los Angeles. Last year I started law school in Los Angeles. I have never lived in a big city before, and I was really excited to be in a massive city with over 4 million people. Ever since I was little, I always knew I had a half-sister in LA, but my parents had this weird anger toward her that always made it feel like a taboo topic. Of course, I had looked her up on social media and I knew what she looked like, but that was about all. We had never actually met. She was never that active on social media, so there wasn't a lot that I could see. Out of nowhere one day in my first year of law school, I got a friend request on Facebook from my sister. Her profile seemed legitimate. She had Facebook friends and her profile picture looked like her. She sent me a message inviting me to a little dinner party at the park with her friends. We could finally meet each other for the first time. I was new to LA and had no idea which parts of the city to avoid at night. I was so excited about the idea, but I had a lot of anxiety about it too. It would be nice if we met, totally clicked, and became besties for life. But what if we ended up sobbing like we were in some dramatic movie scene? What if I tried to talk with her and she just didn't click with me and started showing me an attitude? Or worse, what if it's all going well until we have some sort of disagreement? Someone said something hurtful, and then we were both crying in front of everyone. Honestly, if she had suggested a cozy little bakery for desserts instead, I would have gone, but going to a park with other people just didn't feel right. I thought was worried about how messy it could get. A few weeks later, I googled that park just to see what it was like. Maybe we could meet up there together, just one-on-one. That's when I learned that something was wrong. I won't say the name of the park, but anyone who has lived in LA for long enough will tell you that it's not a safe place for girls to be having a dinner party at night. The area surrounding that park has a very high violent crime rate. It's controlled by gangs. Even people who do illegal businesses in that park are forced to pay a tax to the gang in exchange for just being left alone. So now I was really concerned and curious. I actually tried to get a hold of my sister myself. She was an undergrad at that time at a local college. I had a friend who went to her school. I asked my friend to reach out to her on campus and ask if she'd be okay with meeting us. They connected and the three of us met at my friend's house. It was great, we got along so well. My friend was also very happy to do that for us. The three of us had so much fun. We weren't bursting into tears, but we let out a few. We had dinner, we watched a movie, and we spent the night at my friend's house. When I told my sister about that whole thing, she said she hadn't used Facebook since high school, so someone clearly was impersonating her. I would have told her to report the fake account, but it had already been deleted. She knew she had been impersonated on social media though. Another one of her friends had been scammed by someone pretending to be her. It was some scheme involving fake concert tickets or something like that. Someone had been impersonating my sister. They knew I was in town, and they literally tried to lure me into one of the most dangerous parts of LA at night. I have no idea what their motives were. I don't know if I ever want to find out. Meeting my sister after all these years was a beautiful thing, but the whole backdrop was terrifying. The next story is called The Tinder Stalker. I matched with a man on Tinder one day. The conversation got spicy and I gave him my number so we can continue chatting. We texted that night. We never exchanged photos or nudes or anything like that. Never made plans to meet up. The conversation died and I forgot about them. Weeks go by and I deleted the conversation. Then late one night I got a lewd photo of a man I don't recognise. I think of insulting them but decide just to delete it and not respond. A few weeks later I got another one. I have the idea to check my deleted messages to make sure I don't know them. Sure enough, I find out it's the Tinder guy. It's really weird of them to text me a month later, just lewd images after no contact or anything for over a month. Ooh, so I blocked them. A couple weeks later, I got a lewd video on my Apple Watch. It's the same guy. I'm not sure how I got the message on my watch if I already blocked his number. I block him again on my watch. What a weirdo. A week later, I leave my apartment to go on a walk. I see him. He is right there in front of my apartment walking towards me. He has the same outfit as his profile photos and same tattoos and hat, so I am certain it is them. I never mentioned where I live. I'm freaked out, but I'm dressed in baggy clothes and recently changed up my hair colour, so I keep my head down in hopes that he doesn't recognise me. I walk right past him. I was too scared to even look at him to see his reaction, to see if he recognised me. I was too scared to look back in his direction to see where he went, so I just kept walking forward. I was severely freaked out, but nothing else happened after that, and I never saw them again. I never mentioned where I lived, so my only thought is he must have used my phone number to look me up. It was the least likely person I would have expected. Just some random person I messaged for only one day on Tinder. even with the lewd content they sent, I still just thought they were a regular perv. I never expected them to somehow show up at my apartment. They didn't even text the word to me or attempt to meet up. They just sent lewds over some 2 months and then appeared. It's just so random and weird. I think their motive was definitely something sexually perverted. It gives me the creeps to think about what they wanted, but I'm glad they left me alone. I never give out my real phone number to dates anymore. The last little creepy story I'm going to do is called My Creepy Paper Route Customers. From age 13 until almost 15, I had a paper route. I delivered papers to people's doors 6 days a week. All of my customers, aside from occasional grumps and chatterboxes, were absolutely wonderful. Most of them were older, and so many of them were so happy to see me every day, just to have someone to talk to. Many of them would leave me granola bars, water bottles, and even tips. Winter holidays were a great time because everyone who could left huge tips. It was a pretty good first official job. Eventually, some of the snowbirds moved back and became my customers. One couple, Louise and Gerald, will always stick out in my mind. They started off normal, pretty, friendly people, but I noticed one Sunday, the only day I had to get up early to deliver papers, that Gerald was outside. He chatted me up, nothing unusual, because it was so early and because I'd usually go right to bed after I was done. I was wearing a Britney Spears t-shirt and a pair of polar bear pajama pants. He complimented me and said I was dressed cutely. I was confused because it was pajamas that I just threw on randomly. I was confused by the compliment, but I just went on about my day and didn't think much of it. Something else to note, his wife Louise was always smiling. I couldn't pinpoint why, but it always unnerved me. In retrospect, it gives me the meek and mild and subservient tradwife vibes. Anyways, I had noticed that in their garden there were 3 different dog headstones that all said Fido on it. I was kinda confused as to why they all had the same name, but I figured maybe multiple people had bought them and they wanted to be polite, so they put them out anyways. One day, Louise was out and she had a dog with her. She introduced the dog to me as they had just adopted her, and guess what? They named her Fido. All of the dogs they had were named Fido, and they were all Shelties, just like that one. I thought this was weird and I told my mom about it, and she told me not to be so judgmental, as it was probably one way they dealt with their grief. Here's the thing, they kept trying to get me to come inside. They'd invite me in for tea, which is not really something people do where I'm from. Coffee and donuts is a little more commonplace, but even that isn't something people do on a regular basis. Or they'd invite me in to talk to them. I'd always decline because I had more papers to deliver and I wanted to go home. Gerald kept complimenting my outfits even when they were pajamas. One morning, he did this while getting closer to me and eventually touching my shoulder, and eventually I was like, I got to go, and left. I didn't tell my mum at the time as our relationship was good at that point, and I feared that telling her any concerns that I had would make her not trust me or make her mad. This was also at the tail end of my CSA, which she doesn't know about to this day. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. Then, right before I moved, I really don't think my mum would appreciate me being gone for longer than she expected. She's strict, which wasn't the whole truth, but you gotta do what you gotta do. He seemed to get kind of annoyed and just asked, wouldn't your mum just prefer that you respect your elders and not turn down an invitation? I felt the colour drain from my face, and I noped out so quick. I muttered something about how I really had to hurry along because my dog was sick. I heard him say some compliments about how my hair looked pretty. I have very wavy and curly hair that gets very puffy and voluminous when I'm in the humidity, and he would bring it up a lot, saying that my hair reminded him of the 80s. I booked it as quickly as I could to get to the next house without running. I didn't see Gerald after that, but I did see Louise, and she never stopped inviting me to come inside and play with Fido or have tea. I always declined. She seemed disappointed every time. So that's my weird paper route story. Maybe I'm paranoid, but Gerald and Louise had some funky vibes. Gerald and Louise, let's not meet. These little stories are amazing. Thank you so much for the recommendation, Sarah. It was amazing, and I definitely will continue on doing a kind of series of